This is a momentum that you're listening in right now. Kong Yu with you, keeping company on the show. In the interview feature hour on a Tuesday, how are you doing? It is, first of all, that's right, it's a Tuesday. It's also January 20th. It's a very happening day today indeed, yeah. First of all, I'd like to welcome over the phone today my guest of the hour, Mr. Henry Goh, who is the president of the Malaysian Nature Society, into the interview of the day. Good morning, Henry. How are you?
Hi, Kong Yu. Yeah, I'm fine, thanks.
Okay.
Glad to be on the show.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us on the program today. Today we are talking about your opinions specifically on the management of water catchment areas, yeah?
Yes.
In lieu of course, recent floods that we've faced, important topic for us to discuss. So once again, thank you for joining me on Momentum this morning. And perhaps maybe to kick things off, Henry, give us a little bit of a background on the sort of, water cycle, a little bit as well as what you think with the that cycle that happens in Malaysia, as well as what had happened that caused the recent floods.
Okay, I think essentially talking about the water cycle, it starts with the sun. Yeah, the sun which drives the water cycle by heating water in oceans and seas. Then the water evaporates as water vapor into the air. Ice, rain, and snow, can sublimate, i.e., a transition from solid to gas directly into water vapor. And rising air currents take the vapor up into the atmosphere, where cooler temperatures cause it to condense into clouds. And then the air currents move the water vapor around the globe. Cloud particles collide, they grow, and fallout of the upper atmospheric layers as precipitation. So some of this precipitation falls as rain, snow, or hail, and can also accumulate as ice caps, and glaciers, which can store frozen water for thousands of years. But most of this water falls back into the oceans or onto the land as rain, where the water flows over the ground as what we call the surface runoff. Yeah, a portion of the surface runoff enters rivers in valleys in the various landscapes around the globe, and then the stream takes the moving water into towards the ocean rather. So runoff of water emerging from the ground may also be stored as fresh water in lakes. So I hope this brief explanation is of help.
Okay. So for Malaysia, of course, it is essentially the water cycle, the portion that comes back down onto land is essentially all rain. So that would be the primary determinants of the storage, how shall we say, or catchment areas and the capacity and things like that, yeah? So typically, is it, just looking at it from a layperson's perspective, it would be all the rain that falls on land is either typically land, goes back into lakes, rivers, or they end up in drainage, right? Right. Is that correct?
That would be right. Yes.
Okay.
Because essentially around the world, that's what happens. With the water cycle. It depends on the severity of the rain, the severity of the wind. Has got factors determining how much of water is carried by this. For example, the typhoon or the tornadoes, of this world would carry much more water as opposed to, say, a normal monsoon. But if you actually compare our situation a couple of weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, over in the East Coast,
right?
You find that the additional rain actually was quite unusual. There was very heavy rainfall, so the internal system of accommodating such extremely high rainfall was not in place. So therefore, you get this, huge swells of water, which has caused this floods, across the Kelantan, Terengganu, and parts of Pahang, and also Perak.
Now, is it, in your opinion, solely an issue of tremendous amounts of rain and tremendous amount of rainfall, or is there more to it?
Well, I think one of the root of the chain of events, leading to our today's predicament can be traced back to our, I would call it our overzealous appetite for development in the form of forest clearings and loggings that runs contrary to our natural balance of nature and the environment. So it is actually our hope that finally some sense of urgency in the form of conservation and enforcement of our current laws, be put at the top of the agenda on how Malaysia will strive, in the future. Yeah,
I think that's certainly a sentiment that's shared by many experts, such as, of course, even last week we were focusing on a similar topic just to, get different perspectives on the issue. And while, on the surface it does seem, Henry, that, extra rain and tremendous amount of rainfall, how do we know for sure that it is not, or how do we ascertain the amount that was contributed by the increase in the rainfall, as opposed to, the, how shall we say, the depletion of catchment areas? How do we know for sure? I mean, do we need to study it in more detail? Is that how we will get better sort of a look into the situation that happened?
Well, I think objectively looking at it, of course, there are other factors which has caused this flood. Not necessarily just the loss of rainforests or the additional rain that has actually fallen. It's a combination of factors. But I think, by and large, the global community or the conservationists, from the conservationist point of view, rainforests, our rainforests right around the globe, as well as in Malaysia, are an essential part of our lives, playing multiple roles in its contribution to our ecosystem. One of its many benefits includes moderation of climate change, as well as regulating water flows into the rivers. And then besides being home to more than half of the world's species of flora and fauna, the rainforests are also rich with natural resources such as timber, wild fruit and plants, with medicinal properties.
Right.
So rainforests cover approximately about 30% of the Earth's surface. It is only found in 3 areas in the world. Example, tropical South America, Central Africa, and closer to home, Southeast Asia. And in Malaysia, our land mass is approximately about 32.8 million hectares, of which 54% is covered with rainforests. So from mangrove to mountains, we have it all here in Malaysia.
Right.
But however, the inevitable question is, will our economic growth and growth as a nation come at the expense of nature? So that is a question that I think we have to ponder and seriously, perhaps, to do a study on what have we done with nature, or what will we be doing with nature going forward.
Well, certainly things to ponder, and maybe some of these thoughts will occur to us over the song break. We're going to take a break right now, Henry. And when we come back, more with Henry Goh, who is the president of the Malaysian Nature Society, right here on Trax Momentum's interview of the day. Make sure you keep it right here on Trax. All right, at 11:30 a.m. in the interview hour of Momentum. Good morning. If you're just tuning in right now, well, this is Kong Yu with you, bringing you the interview feature of the day. Been speaking to Mr. Henry Goh, who is the president of the Malaysian Nature Society. He joins me via the phone to talk about a couple of important issues, especially in lieu of the recent floods, and of course, from the perspective of the Malaysian Nature Society. Thank you so much, Henry, for joining me on the program today. Okay, great stuff. Now we're talking about your views, essentially from the Malaysian Nature Society's perspective about how, of course, there should be adequate conservation, adequate protection of the natural jungles, which, of course, are very important to the balance of nature, as you put it, as well as housing lots of species of flora and also fauna. I was wondering, Henry, is there or are you able to paint a little bit of a picture, literally, of the situation, I mean, in the flood-hit areas in Peninsular Malaysia, in terms of the amount of maybe forests or deforestation compared over a certain period of time? Are you able to do that?
Well, I think the amount of deforestation that is taking place versus what we already have. I think earlier on I mentioned that currently Malaysia still has about 54% of forests, as opposed to, let's say, if you take from the global perspective, some of the more developed countries like the UK has got much less in terms of rainforest cover.
Right.
So in that sense, Malaysia is not that off, in terms of the forest cover. But the concern is of what has just happened in after one month or so with the great floods. I think more effort should be put into to try to conserve whatever and maintain what that we already have. Getting the knowledge of what has been learned from the more developed countries, and what has actually happened through the tsunamis and the etc. Catastrophes that has taken place right around the globe. So we are quite fortunate in that sense. But I think looking in the local front, there's always the challenge between development on the one hand and also conservation. And that's where we need to get a real grips at it to get a balance of making these two more equitable, in every sense of the word, so that going forward we will be able to have the cake and eat it too. If you take that as more or less a light-hearted assessment of what we should actually be doing.
Okay.
Both the authorities and as well as the NGOs and the general public, plus of course commerce, industry, providing employment. So all these factors have to be taken into consideration.
Right.
It's not easy, but I think it has to be done going forward.
Now, specifically for the states, you talk about states of Kelantan, Terengganu, and maybe even, let's say, Pahang, yeah? Has there been massive amounts of deforestation, say, in the past decade or so? I mean, I'm not 100% familiar with this, and it doesn't seem to me that has been the case. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think insofar as deforestation, there are two schools of thoughts, right?
Okay.
I mean, right now being debated. One is what constitutes forest, rainforest.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's quite clear. Rainforest is virgin forest, unlocked, and with full of biodiversity within it. And then you have one secondary forest, and maybe thirdly, man-made forest in the form of palm oil estates, in the form of rubber estates. So the danger there is to classify the third category as a forest.
Right.
Which essentially, in the real the real sense of the word, it is, and they are not.
They are not,
because they cannot be compared to the rainforest.
Yeah, because I mean, you're talking about an orderly, planting of crops and trees. Certainly does not happen or occur very naturally. The as well as the biodiversity in which to provide the necessary life cycles of wildlife, right,
as well as the flora and fauna within it. So it is totally, I think, perhaps one-sided towards the commercial sense of the word, as well as they have to be looking into more the attainable, what do you call that, to maintain the forest as it is, so that part of the country could actually still mitigate with the rainforest to mitigate some of these natural forces of nature, which is of benefit to to the nation as a whole. Because I mean, if you look at it, the amount of money that needs to be spent to uplift the pre-floods as well as the post-floods, that kind of money could have actually been saved if there had been, say, a longer-term preparation, to ensure that there's some of this protection of the excessive water flow, for example, to ensure that there's some flood mitigation factors in place, and other means, of ensuring that the loss of lives as well as loss of property is also looked into.
So, in a nutshell, basically, are you saying, Henry, that just in a way, if I'm oversimplifying things, that just a bit too much land has been cleared for agricultural reasons, or to be converted to, say, palm oil estates and things like that? They don't serve, obviously they're not natural forests with the whole complete ecosystem. And perhaps maybe there has not been enough correlation or studies that's been done on the effect of converting all the land into this sort of usage.
Maybe I could perhaps explain it in another way.
Okay, if you could summarize for us before we move on, that would be great. Okay.
For example, the amount of heavy rainfall is bound to create soil erosion, right? Thereby choking the rivers and then creating landslips and mudslides, along the steep and also the unstable slopes.
Okay.
Land clearing, especially also during the rainy season or the monsoon season, will also exacerbate further deterioration of the highlands. So some of these measures has to be taken into consideration, and also the inappropriate and unsafe development is also often, a major contributing factor of our highlands deterioration, and other factors which will include, appreciating of our natural heritage. To become more sensitive to nature and the profile of our highlands and hill slopes. So I think the net effect should be a more orderly and controlled kind of development,
right.
Be it for building, be it for planting of monocrops like palm oil, as well as for the rubber plantations. Some form of a control balance should be in place.
So essentially, like,
to mitigate this.
Many chunks of activities which happen or are happening, but they're not, in a sense, they're not coordinated, they're not integrated together in terms of their effects.
And if I may mention also, stronger enforcement. The laws are there, the guidelines and laws are there. But, to prevent further degradation, I think some of this enforcement has got to be more adequately enforced, and it should be implemented like immediately. So essentially, I think we don't have much time, and also the education of awareness and lack of proper enforcement, things like that, all comes into the picture.
All right. Speaking with Henry Goh, who is the president of Malaysian Nature Society, right here on Trax Momentum's Interview of the Hour. Stay tuned. It's Better Than Ezra right here on Trax Momentum. Back on the final segment of today's interview of the day. And I've been speaking to Mr. Henry Goh, president of the Malaysian Nature Society, right here on, of course, important topics to take note of in lieu, of course, of the recent flood situation. Thank you so much, Henry, for joining me on the show. And early on here, you were basically telling us a little bit about the proper management of natural resources in terms of forest management overall, and how we should actually have more integrated efforts in those activities of clearance, of land clearing, etc., etc. And of course, the effect is quite vast on what is known as the water catchment areas. Yeah, can you give us a bit of a brief on what constitutes water catchment areas and how do they actually work in retaining water? Okay,
water catchment areas like in the highlands helps to actually store water
Mm-hmm.
within the forest itself, so that they can actually slowly be.
Hello? Henry, are you there? Okay, we seem to have lost Henry. Okay, let me just take care of that real quick, and I will be right back. This is live right here on Trax Momentum, and Kong Yu with you on the show, and I'll be back in just a few seconds, hopefully. I'm back on Trax Momentum. This is Kong Yu with you, joined by, of course, Henry Goh, the president of the Malaysian Nature Society. We cut off just now, and you're back with us on the program, I hope. And
Yes, I'm here.
yes, we are talking about water catchment areas.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just briefly explain what is the water catchment area.
Yep.
Well, it is essentially water collected, by the natural landscape, from basically at the top of usually at a high level, and then all these catchments of water, whether it's rainwater or runoff water, they all eventually flow into a river or a dam or a lake, or an ocean, and then also into the groundwater system.
Right.
So, if you look into this description, it is so important that we should have this natural catchment areas in which we could store water for our general everyday use, for survival basically of the human race. Because if we bear the hills of all this rainforest,
Okay.
then essentially we are taking away this very important water storage or water catchment area.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think we should make a concerted effort to ensure that this, the catchment areas are protected.
Right.
Long term.
Mm-hmm. So it is basically, there's so many factors to it, isn't it? There is the rainfall portion that we talked about, and sometimes weather patterns are just unpredictable. And then there's the water catchment side of things in terms of how much water can actually be retained. And then, of course, the factors of land clearing and issues like that, which, of course, have the effect on the whole structure of things and how the water flows and how water actually gets captured. Now, is it in terms of, just a quick question, in terms of the water catchment and drainage, where do the drains run to? That just occurred to me right now. Water that goes in the drain.
At the end of the day, all water eventually either seeps back into the ground as groundwater, or if it could reach the sea, it will eventually flow out into the ocean. That's essentially the pattern. Or in some cases, it could be just it dries up, and becomes vapor again, and then falls back down in rain.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm just gonna retry this because of technical issues. Henry. I'll get right back to you in just a little short while. In the meantime, of course, I'll have a little bit more with Henry Goh, who is the president of the Malaysian Nature Society, right here on Trax Momentum. Stay tuned.
Your number one radio station, TraxxFM.
Kong Yu right here on Trax Momentum, joined by Henry Goh, president of Malaysian Nature Society, right here on the program. As we get about to wrap up the program, Henry, you there, yes? Okay. Rainy season occurs fairly predictable, a little bit less predictable these days to Malaysia. It is, of course, in terms of talking about the monsoon season, it is quite an annual affair, yeah? What is your suggestions and opinions on how we can better prepare ourselves for this year?
Well, a couple of things. One of which actually is proper land use planning. Yeah, the state government can actually control developments in flood-prone areas, such as the floodplains and also the riparian areas. There's not much we can do about existing development, but state governments, I think, need to be more disciplined with future development. Secondly is to protect the upland forests. The forests in the uplands, I think, help to moderate the floods as their vegetation, help to reduce the speed of water. Allow water to seep into the soil better, and reduce the volume of water moving downstream. Now, thirdly is to reduce or to minimize runoff to downstreams. So in this sense, our Department of Irrigation and Drainage has got clear guidelines on flood retention and measurements to enhance the permeability and reduce the speed of water running off from such development. I think this could be better implemented going forward. And last but not least is improving our river drainage. This is usually done by widening and deepening of the river and also constructing flood protecting bunds.
Right.
Now, for the last maybe 50 years or so, there has been some drawbacks, and this has actually increased the speed of water, which then caused other problems, including higher flood peaks, and also by improving the river drainage, it can also solve the flooding in one place, but could lead to problems in another place.
Right.
For example, if we do river improvements, it also often damages the important habitats for fish and other river life forms. So there, as I mentioned in our earlier part of the chat, is that there's a need to study and as well as to ensure that all these elements are considered. So in that sense, perhaps at this point, maybe a proposal that perhaps a think tank comprising of the authorities, comprising of NGOs, comprising of experts could be put together to study for the long term how do we mitigate the view, and all the views will be put together for perhaps a master plan,
right?
Which could then be a long term one for mitigating this floods.
Right. I think a challenging sort of situation for all parties.
Certainly, yes.
At the moment,
but
I
it's not
think
easy.
Yes.
But something that needs to be done. But because, as you mentioned, this is a yearly affair. So if we anticipate that it's going to perhaps happen, but cannot predict the severity next year and the year after next.
Exactly.
I think we have to be doing something.
Yeah.
To at least we know that that's something that we do will help to alleviate going forward.
Absolutely.
The floods. Yeah.
Any last sort of messages you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, just 2 points, Kong Yu.
Okay.
We would like to actually urge, as Malaysian Nature Society, I would like to urge the authorities and also our responsible politicians and governing bodies and the independent experts that I mentioned, to strictly impose the ban of illegal land and forest clearing altogether. This may seem to be a very unpopular statement, but I think a statement of the fact that if you want to mitigate it, you have to stop this flooding. This is one of the areas that we need to do. And other point is that for the immediate future, we also urge our government to eradicate deforestation completely, and let's not have another tragic accident such as this to remind us of the actions that need to be taken.
All right. Well, we thank you for your opinion and your time shared with us today, Henry.
It's a pleasure.
Yep. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. You take care.